Hi everyone, I'm Gemma Adams. I'm a project manager with the National Coordinating Centre for Public Engagement, and I've been responsible for leading the action learning process within the National Civic Impact Accelerator programme, so the NCIA programme. I'm joined today by my colleague Zoe Williamson. Zoe will be co-chairing with me today. If you have any tech difficulties, please direct them to Zoe within the chat. You can either put it within the chat to everyone, or you can direct it to Zoe individually. Okay, so welcome everybody. Thank you for being here with us today to showcase the projects funded through the innovation funding through the National Civic Impact Accelerator. We are focusing on 6 of the projects who were funded through the programme. There were other projects that were seed funded and through smaller pots of funding. So there's other projects through the action learning process, such as a heritage network, student empowerment report, inclusive governance. And we will be pulling through all of those into a report later on in the year. But today is really a focus on the 6 projects that went through the competitive round of funding. Each project will only have 10 minutes to talk through their project and its impact, but we will give time for questions throughout the event, and all of the speakers can share other links and resources attached to their projects within the chats. Let's just have a quick look at the agenda of the different projects that you'll be hearing from. So we'll be hearing initially from a Civic Fellowship project. We'll then be moving into a collaborative value initiative project. So that's really focused on return on investment and social value metrics and how the community uses those. We'll be hearing about a community hub, being that homepage for the community to the university. We'll also be hearing about a community conversations toolkit. And that will take us through the first half of the session, where we'll have a Q&A then with those first 4 speakers. So do pop your questions into the chat as and when they occur to you. We'll have a quick break at 12, and then we'll come back to hear from the Right to Food University, a reverse volunteering scheme, an inclusive economic growth project, and then we'll have a further Q&A with those 3 speakers where you can post some questions to them. Very quickly, I just wanted to give you a real sort of quick grounding in what the action learning process was, what we feel we've learned, and also just an indication of some of the resources that the NCCPE are developing. So on this slide, just quickly, there's a number of different quotes there that we gathered from action learning participants, either at the beginning of their journey or towards the end, really noting how the process helped professionalise civic roles, how it really anchored experience within civic engagement, also that knowledge of relevant policy and strategic work, hearing about examples of good practice from others and other institutions, felt like it was a really, really strong indication of how well the process worked. So if we quickly move on to the next slide, because I'm already cutting into time. Here, and we will share these slides later, is just looking at what we feel we've learned ourselves and the action learning participants about collaborative place-based working. And a lot of these you'll know about, but it really came forth within what was a 20-month process, that when it's done well, it's relational, it's emergent, it's responsive, and it takes time to do. We became very aware in the process that connections made between the universities and partners, they're often facilitated by generalists, or those connectors who have that lived experience or tacit knowledge of the place that they are situated and the organisations that sit within them, and that it can be lonely work and that it doesn't necessarily work when it's bolted on. And if we move quickly to the next slide, this just gives an indication to what we feel we can practically do based on the learning from the action learning process, really looking at how we connect with others, how we can't expect results straight away, looking at what internal and external meeting structures exist, and finding out who already is doing the work. We will be pulling all of this into a report that we're currently working on with our colleagues at Crazer, who observed the process. So we will talk a little bit later about that report. And again, just a quick overview of some of the resources we are developing. We've noticed gaps in practice, in knowledge, in confidence with some aspects of civic working. So this is what the NCCPE are working on, a civic academic practice resource, of which you'll be hearing from Camberwell College actually in a second about some of the work they've been doing in that space. The civic capabilities framework, how do we really professionalise and embed civic capabilities within professional development structures, civic tactics and methods, a place navigator, which I believe is being launched next week. So Zoe will talk a bit more about that if we have time later, and a civic outcomes framework that supports practitioners to really look at how can they articulate the impact of the work that they're undertaking. Okay, so I flew through that, but we will potentially come back to that a little bit later. So what I want to do now is hand over to Alice White and Joel Simpson from Camberwell College of Arts, which is based within the University Arts London, to talk about their Civic Fellowship project. So Alice and Joel, I'll hand over to you for your 10-minute presentation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Gemma. Hello everyone, my name's Alice. I'm Community Engagement Manager working across Camberwell, Chelsea and Wimbledon.
And hi, I'm Joel, lecturer in fine art within Camberwell, Chelsea, Wimbledon, as Gemma mentioned, part of the University of the Arts London.
Sorry, Zoe, do you mind moving on? Can I control it? Yeah, sorry. And then maybe one more, sorry. So, okay. So I just also wanted to give a shout out. We are part of a much bigger team on this. So we have Hannah Guthrie, Head of Public Engagement here, Shibboleth Schechter, Academic and Head of BA Interior Spatial Design, citizens organisers, Albie, Victoria and Hannah, and Rosie Hornbuckle, Reader in Design here. So big shout out to all of them. So there were two strands to our innovation funding, all spurred by an interest in finding mechanisms to support academic engagement with civic work. The first strand I'm going to talk very briefly about, but we ran a workshop with 12 participants leading civic, public and community engagement from 11 UK unis to develop peer learning around models for academic engagement with civic priorities. Sorry, Zoe, do you mind just moving on 2 slides? I think I've mixed things up just to make it lively. Next one, thanks. And this resulted in the development of a practical tool, 5 mechanisms for academic engagement, which I will share in the chat later. We have that PDF ready now. And the second main focus was our Civic Fellowship. And this was to look at the work we've done with Citizens UK up to the point of applying it to the NCIA, and thinking about how we could enable an academic time to look at this work, given that we're such a teaching intensive university, that, like many of our peers, I'm sure. So since 22, so 3 years, UAL has been a member of Citizens UK. For those of you who don't know Citizens, they're an alliance of civil society organisations that coordinate social justice campaigns at local, regional and national scales. Here at Camberwell, we're a member of the Southwark and Peckham Citizens, and this brings together different types of organisations, be it Oliver Goldsmith Primary School next door, us as a university, Spring Community Hub, who are a voluntary sector organisation down the road. And we come together to tackle local issues that are important to people, such as housing, living wage and health justice in Southwark. We built a team at the college of staff and students, all driven by social justice, to learn community organising techniques with citizens organisers and to take creative action. So we'd been exploring how art and design can be used in this campaign work, but we'd never really had a research lens on it. And so we specifically wanted to bring this research lens through the Civic Fellowship to look at the housing and health work we've been doing with citizens and the South London Anchor Alliance NHS trusts locally. Now I'm going to pass on to Joel.
And if we could skip a couple of, or jump a slide or two. That's right, yeah, thank you. So as Alice mentioned, on beginning the Civic Fellowship, the overarching goal of the partnership between UAL, Southwark Citizens and our local healthcare alliance had been established, and that was to tackle poor and insecure housing as a determinant of health inequalities. And so my overall work was seeking to strengthen and develop that campaign, particularly by working with colleagues across the partnership to explore how our university could support the campaign through research. And a key aim was to produce a theory of change to identify the possibility for future collaboration between the partners. And if we jump to the next slide, please. So the role and the research methods were particularly immersive. So I was integrated into the Camberwell Citizens team, which Alice mentioned is made up of staff and students at the college. And from the get-go was very involved in planning campaign actions, which included a health and housing coalition forum that facilitates knowledge exchange between community leaders as part of the Citizens Network, healthcare providers and local authority representatives. And overall, I was aiming to observe and document campaign challenges in order to understand how research could support those challenges. I also interviewed colleagues across the partnership, as well as academics carrying out participatory research into the determinants of health inequalities. And finally, I facilitated a theory of change workshop, which aimed to explore the possibilities for the partnership's approach to tackling health inequalities through research and knowledge exchange activities, which I'm now writing up into a report. And that workshop was a fascinating sort of real-time attempt to bring together a range of perspectives from across the partnership, and naturally generated a real wealth of ideas. And so having done that work to understand what the campaign challenges are around health and housing, several possible research activities emerged out of that work. And I'll zoom into one in particular, which was a cross-sector working group for documenting best practice in policy implementation, and particularly doing that documentation through arts-based approaches. And so this would be a working group comprising of a citizens community leader, a UAL academic, as well as NHS and local authority decision makers, focusing on one of the key components of the housing challenges that we encounter in our local area, such as exploring how to deliver design interventions in temporary accommodation in order to improve the living conditions in those facilities. And the partnership approach, the cross-sector nature of that working group, having understood from citizens leaders and from staff at the university, the cross-sector nature of that group would be important in order to enhance the feasibility of the research outputs, as well as support citizens leaders in developing research skills while they're maintaining their connection to grassroots organising. And it would, of course, need appropriate funding mechanisms, particularly to support citizens leaders being involved. And the aim of the working group, and again, sort of responding to the feedback that I was hearing from being involved in campaigning and from interviews and from the workshop, the aim would be to co-produce case studies to explore how best practice policy changes have been implemented in other contexts, and particularly drawing on UAL's resource in arts-based approaches in order to surface local nuances and enhance understanding of the causal and descriptive elements of policy translation across the different contexts that would be explored. Thanks, Zoe. And then finally, just to reflect on some of the reflections of being involved as a Civic Fellow have particularly sort of centred on how we understand the role of the university. And so UAL models itself as a social purpose university with a core guiding policy to change the world through our creative endeavour. And a key question here that has emerged through the fellowship is, what does it take for our research agenda to be informed or even set by partnership within a broad-based organising network? And this is in part about perhaps shifting our language towards not being a partner with Citizens UK, but being a member of a broad-based organising network. And then in what ways does our membership of Citizens demand perhaps a fundamental reimagining of the role of the higher education institution? For example, as a cooperative, what would that look like from a curriculum perspective? How would curricula respond to the needs of the local community? How do we open up spaces across our campuses for community use? And finally, how undertaking the fellowship has impacted me as an academic. My research has recently concentrated on how socially engaged arts practice can support community-led housing and lecturing on a fine art programme, but being principally concerned with models for community organising has felt like quite an interesting interdisciplinary position to occupy. However, trying to understand the impact that we could make as a university has given me, particularly as a creative institution, has given me a new perspective on the complexity many of my colleagues identify with what constitutes transformational art and design, and possibly the potential tensions between what some of my colleagues view as inherently opposing disciplines. And so overall, the fellowship has really intensified my interest in facilitating conversations within my own department, as well as internally across the university, around the relationship between art, design, and housing and health advocacy work. So we're going to have a Q&A, but if you want to directly reach out to Alice and I about any of what we've mentioned, yeah, we'd love to continue chatting. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Joel and Alice. So much interesting work there, and how the fellowship has touched on so many different aspects of your place and the university and community and other organisations. As Joel said, we have the Q&A function. If there's anything you're thinking about, do pop it in there. But in the meantime, we are going to move on to the next presentation. We'll give some time for question and answer afterwards. So now I'd really like to invite the Collaborative Value Initiative. That it was a consortium project that we funded, and we've got representatives here from Ayad Al-Ani, Nikki Stevenson and Hannes Reid. I'm sure you'll introduce yourselves as you speak. So I'll hand over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Gemma. Yeah, so I'm Hannes Reid, and I am there working at the University of Birmingham as part of this project, but also alongside my colleagues, Ayad, who is part of the director of London Central Academy, Nikki Stevenson at Anglia Ruskin, and also Steve Griggs as part of University of Staffordshire. And our programme, or piece of work, is about the Collaborative Value Initiative. So how do we sort of create social impact? How do we demonstrate this, not just for universities, but VCSEs, and have a broader social value as well? So, and on the next slide, I'll talk about it's kind of the starting point really for how this came about. So what do we know about universities? What do we know about their civic missions? What economic difference they can make, and kind of what is meant by social value? And in some ways, this is trying to be how universities can sort of fertilize the ground. That's the idea, that we can provide the space to enable more social value to grow. But what kind of is that? So in some ways, it's a two-way relationship. It's not just universities going out into the world, the wider world to do research or to teach with people. I think that's some ways not seen as a very effective way of doing things, because then relationships could break down or be seen as one-sided. So it's important to kind of understand this two-way relationship, and this is kind of come out of some some readings and some interviews that we have taken. And this is, yeah, kind of the starting point. No, this is an important understanding of how do we generate more social value. And in terms of sort of the kind of the another option would be to engage in teaching and research. This is seen as a core part of universities' work, teaching and research, but how do you support this broader social mission at the same time? And lots of VCSEs have their social mission as a core part of their work. So how can universities work with VCSEs in a two-way relationship to help conduct research that would help them? Is there a way of then bringing in research income to support VCSEs or connect up research with real-world findings? And similarly, providing real-world teaching experiences or learning experiences for students to learn from what does it really mean to be part of a civic and social mission. And also there's an economic part there. We can kind of sort of demonstrate that impact. You know, does it bring in research income and connect up work? And similarly, on number 3, with the supporting a broader social value and kind of supporting an economic or demonstrating an economic impact there, how do VCSEs actually win contracts with universities? Across England, the UK, £70 billion is spent by universities. The economic impact of procurement is £70 billion. This is a big opportunity. And I don't think we know how much is spent with VCSEs, but you know, even a proportion of that would then generate a large economic impact. 1% would end up having £700 million of broader economic impact, which is demonstrable. And that links with number 4, which is, you know, how do we measure, evidence this social value, and also who's accountable to improve on it? So in some ways we can measure, sort of map maybe where our research goes. To what extent is research being done with VCSEs? To what extent is teaching being done? And also how much money is being directed through procurement towards VCSEs? So that's a way of understanding there, and we can build from there. So that's the sort of starting point. But actually, what does this mean to VCSEs themselves? I'll pass over to Ayad to be able to share his findings from his interviews.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Hannes. The VCSEs are the voluntary community and the social enterprise sector. And these were the targets of our research, simply because when applying for funding, they used to focus, especially the SMEs, they used to focus on the qualitative story, which does not translate into the money language of the funders. And that's why we came to the point of experimenting existing proxies. Proxies are the monetary value for the intangible outcomes. For example, how much would an ambulance cost in case that we need to call the emergency, and how much could be saved if we are having a first aid training replacing that ambulance. So from the findings of the interviews, we realize that there are 3 main mismatches between the needs and the actual barriers. The first mismatch was between the metrics and intangible impacts. The intangible impacts actually were not measurable clearly to the interviewees. It was hard to quantify outcomes like confidence, like happiness, like well-being, like mental health. So it was only a matter of stating it, but there was no way of giving a unit, which does not, again, translate into money. The interviews were mainly basing their focus on the storytelling. So it was not translated into figures. It was just a matter of qualitative value. The second mismatch was for organizations who did use proxies, but they found them very consuming, resources consuming, financially, human resources. The time for collecting data was an issue. So even for organizations who are harvesting these proxies, the existing systems are very difficult for them, which are repelling the interviews from continuing on with the existing. So there is a limited awareness of the existing proxies, and there is a high complexity of using them. It is limited to a certain niche of academics and highly cost consultants who are able to deal with these proxies. The third mismatch was between the support and the need. The VCSEs, they wanted to improve ways to measure that impact. They reached the point of collecting data, but unable to analyze these data. And again, the tie and the link with the university was in a need for improvement. So collaboration with universities is welcome, and it was required. Now, what did we find again from what did we conclude from these? We find that there is a need for building two-way strategic relationship, not only universities spoon-feeding the VCSEs with what to do, but we needed the higher education sector to listen to the VCSEs and start from their needs. So it was about the relationship built to be continual and to be sustainable. The other thing is the engagement in the research and in the teaching. As Hannes has mentioned, we have local examples which are poorly tracked, and some feedback was mainly about the language used by the academics, which was a barrier towards maintaining that collaboration. The procurement for the contract as well, the current system is complex, and it is not encouraging the VCSEs to go into that sophisticated pattern of articulating the value in monetary language. And again, the accountability, the measuring and evidences of social value was an issue that we have highlighted, that universities needs to measure the broader social value outcome and not limited to a certain organization. And that brought us to a very big challenge, which was how to customize the existing broad tools in order to fit the existing sample locally, which was a big challenge, and it is opening a door for the next phase of research, hopefully. And this is what my colleague Nikki will be addressing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I mean, I think from our research findings, from our and the other methodologies we used, we identified these are the key messages and next steps. And this is really sort of pulling out of what you've already heard. And the first one is about every party, and whatever kind of action you're doing is understanding what change looks like and what data is needed, having a simple theory of change and measuring against it using appropriate tools. I'm glad I'm not the first person to mention theory of change this morning. Measuring soft outcomes, this is really what the third sector values, but they're not very good at keeping robust and consistent records, and we can certainly help with that to enhance the value of the stories and narratives that they have in abundance. Finding and applying proxy values, as has already been mentioned, there are existing proxy values, and but they're hard to find and they're quite difficult for organisations to apply, and particularly how we can quantify the values of soft outcomes and apply these transparently. Using AI is, I think, seen in some quarters as a quick and easy and cheap solution, but I think it is inherently problematic because it's really critical to be transparent when you're reporting social impact and putting a value on it, because there's so much it's a slightly contested ground. There's no finite values that everybody agrees on. So you have to be really clear about your methodology and your approach. AI lacks transparency. It just spits out a number at the end, and often the organisation itself doesn't quite understand how that value was reached, and I think that is problematic. This kind of knowledge, I think, is outweighed by real world knowledge, and that is very valuable, and we need to recognise that. So I think checkpoints and recommendations are important. The value of co-production in designing the measurement of activities as well as designing the services themselves. Very often, I think the commissioners or the funders are no clearer on what it is they want than sometimes the organisation is on how they should report it. So people need to come together and agree that at the outset of a project. And I think that recognising this as a learning and enabling process, not as an imposition, as has already been said. And I think one size won't fit all. A procurement process needs to reflect these findings and recognise that different organisations will measure in different ways, but there need to be core consistent approaches that people are taking, even if they're using different methodologies to get to the end result, because different organisations of different sizes will do things differently. And I think that we shouldn't be imposing one simple method on all of them.
Great, thank you so much, Ayad, Nikki and Hannes, for that. I'm aware it's a very small amount of time for it. It's a big topic and lots of different tools and ways forward that you've come up with through your research. Please do pop anything in the chat or Q&A if you'd like to dig a bit deeper with the Collaborative Value Initiative on the work they undertook. But now I'm going to hand over to Yola Nelson, a Public Engagement Manager at the University of Plymouth, who will be taking us through the Community Hub and the homepage for communities. Over to you, Yola.
Hello, thank you very much. I realised very early on this morning that I sent the slightly outdated presentation through to Zoe, and I am not Matt Grant. I am Yola Nelson, the Public Engagement Manager at the University of Plymouth. Matt was our Community Engagement Officer who we brought in to lead on this project for us. So if we go on to the next slide, thank you. So we went up to Birmingham last March. We were invited into the second phase of the NCIA programme. And we went up with a couple of our community partners. Brilliant day there. And actually from there, we started the conversation before we even had the idea for funding to find a place on our website or at the university that would allow us to connect with our communities in a better way. There was quite a disconnect and a divide between the university and the city. We are a campus-based university, but parts of Plymouth has quite large deprivation, and there was always seen as a kind of disconnect between between the university and other parts of the city. So if we can move on, please, Zoe. And that's where obviously the NCIA project came about. So if we can pull up all of the bits on here, great. So we formed a partnership with 4 partners across the city. So the council were involved, Plymouth Octopus Project, Nudge Community Builders, and Plymouth Social Enterprise Network. So they were with us for the entire journey, and they were written into the bid. And we also worked obviously alongside the NCCPE and Lancaster University, who supported us with the project they're going to be talking about in a moment. So we knew that we couldn't do anything in terms of community engagement because we don't have that function at the university. So we knew that we needed to build in time and bring in capacity. We got sort of very lucky in that Matt, who had been working for Plymouth Social Enterprise Network's contract came to an end as this funding was announced. So we were able to employ Matt as a community engagement officer throughout the project, which was brilliant. And he worked a couple of days a week through from last October to March, and is now working 1 day a week as an extension of the project that we were able to get. We also knew that we wanted to ensure that anybody who was taking part in the project was paid for their time. So the partners had some allocation of time so they could attend our meetings, they could feed into every part of the project. And also we paid participants for attending some of our workshops. So we had a really good group of people who we knew could inform us and lead us in the right direction through our partners. And then from there, we devised a workshop which we ran, and I'll show you that one in a moment. And we were able to target lots of different groups, and we were also supported through our social research unit. So they were able to come along to our workshop, write up a really comprehensive report, which we could then use to inform what we were going to put onto our hub. So if we go on now, Zoe. So this is the workshop that we ran last December. It was based down in a really well-known street in Plymouth, which is a part of a very deprived area. And that was at Nudge, one of our partners. And we had over 30 community group members there. So it was aimed at, we had community connectors who were employed by the council. We had really active community groups across the city, mostly from the VCSE sector. And they came for a couple of hours. We paid for a facilitator to come in and run that session for us. He was really well known in that area. And it was a really interesting and brilliant 2 hours. I think everybody that was there felt very inspired to be part of the project. And we wanted to know from them how the university could work with them, what barriers did they have to connecting with the university, and really importantly, what were their priorities for working with us. So we used a tool that we'd found through this network to create a diamond of priorities. So we gave all of those out to the groups, and then we asked them to kind of shape what those priorities were for them in their groups. And then we also did that as well, and we were able to compare them. So excellent conversations were happening, but the mood in the room and the feeling in the room did go down slightly when we showed them what our priorities were. So I think for them, we knew what we expected their priorities to be in terms of support for them, sustainability in their work, accessing researchers, accessing rooms, accessing support, funding, that sort of thing. But when we showed them sort of our priorities, which were connecting our research into communities, hearing the voice of the communities and how they can support participatory research, that sort of thing, they're like, well, that's not what we want. So it was very interesting to do that piece of work. And I think the kind of warmth came back into the room when we were able to explain, why that was important to us. And it doesn't mean that their priorities weren't important, but we can have different priorities and still, support them, and they can support us as well. So if we move on, Zoe. So this is just the community priority cards that we use and that we had, and then because we had the social research unit there, we were able to get some really nice quotes and pull those out, which we were able to inform our hub. So a lot of it was knowing who to connect to, where to look, where to get started in the process, and that processes can take a long time. Just had another example of that yesterday, where a community group, POP, in fact, who were one of our partners, want to book a room for their AGM in November, and I can't do that for them until our timetable is released in August. So it's those, it takes time, and it's not going to be perfect, but we're hoping that the hub, is a stepping stone for that. If we can move on as well, Zoe. So we also did a second workshop in March. So once we'd done the first one in December, we built on what we'd learnt from there. We ran a second one in March, which was much smaller, and again, everybody was recompensed for that. And that's where we used a toolkit from Lancaster to help us to facilitate people through that journey. There's a picture on one of the slides there of Matt doing that. So we did invite people up onto the campus because we wanted to use the computer rooms so that we could take them through the hub. Obviously, it's a digital platform, so we wanted to show them what that was and take them through a journey where they could identify on the hub what they wanted to know and could they find that. And we used the Lancaster toolkit in order to do that, which was really helpful in supporting us through it. If we move on now as well. So the hub looks like this, and I will pop a link into the chat for you. For that, we have a short URL of just /local as well, which is really helpful when we're promoting it. But essentially it is a web page, and we started out thinking we didn't just want a web page, but actually when we did the testing is that they just wanted to have everything all in one place. So we've got some headlines of discovering together, working together, being together, and what's happening as well. And they had no idea about the researcher portal, for example, that they can go on and find researchers that are relevant to their field, how they can collaborate, some local case studies, how they can get access to students through placements and internships and volunteering. They didn't realise that was something available to them. Specialist advice and consultation, and how to hire a room, which was a really big one for them. They wanted to know that they can come up and what they could get free access to and things like that. And then what's happening, and they can also post their own news on there as well. We have a Padlet on there, so a community notice board we're calling it, so people can go on and ask questions and we can answer those for them, and then it'll be a live notice board. They can find things that others have asked for, and it might be useful for them too. So it's ever evolving, and we have had to pull in lots of parts of the university together to kind of work through what's going on there. And obviously things change all the time, so it's going to be that sort of maintenance of that going forward as well. And if we go on to the last slide now. So events like today, well, this was shown at an event about 2 or 3 weeks ago now. We, off the back of that, all of the work that we've done, we hosted a Engage Plymouth event, which we had sold 100 tickets for people to come from our local community to hear about what's happening at the university. So we took everything we learned from the workshop and the hub work, and then basically made a day of it as well. So we had researchers coming in and talking about how they work in the community. We had our internships team coming in, talking about how people could access students to support them. We had our Get Involved Awards, which are our participatory research funded awards, showcasing all of their work. And we had over 85 people in the room, so it's really, really great. And actually in the feedback, they want a lot more. So we're talking about developing a community engagement network now, where we can meet a few times a year and people can connect with the university in that way. So the project ends at the end of July, and Matt will be just finishing up now, writing his report, sharing kind of the step-by-steps that we went through to create the hub. And then will be a handover document and a legacy document, so what we need to be doing to maintain that site, and developing some staff training as well. So we're working with Nudge, the community building group, and one of our really expert place researchers in arts to develop some training for researchers on how to better work with communities and the intricacies that come with working with community groups. So yes, that is us.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Lola, for taking us through that. And so quickly as well, we've had some questions and answers. Some questions which we'll hopefully answer after we hear from Abby Lucy Lloyd. So Abby is from Lancaster University, who's going to talk to us through the Community Dialogue project. So Abby, I'll hand over to you for your 10 minutes.
Thanks, Gemma. Yeah, lovely to be here, everyone. My name's Abby Lucy Lloyd from Lancaster, and I was the project manager on the Community Dialogue project. So if we can go to the next slide. So I'll just share a little bit of background on the project. So we joined the NCIA programme in 2023, and as such, we, as part of that programme, created a civic mobilising group with our key civic partners in the district. And through conversations through that mobilising group, we had started to kind of uncover that we would like to do some more community listening in the district. It was an idea that had been bouncing around for a little while, but we hadn't quite worked out how exactly to do it. And through those conversations with the mobilising group, we kind of hit on a route, and then we were successful in bidding for the innovation funding and partnered with Plymouth, as Yola referenced, to work on a community dialogue project. So we wanted to use the vehicle that the Lancaster City Council had been using through community conversations that had started in the pandemic, but they were looking to review those conversations and improve them. There was kind of lots of legacy from the pandemic, and obviously the world had moved on and changed quite a bit. So we wanted to do some research as to kind of what had been said previously, and then use that to build on, create a toolkit that would kind of allow us to better listen to our communities, and then share the learning by running a couple of those community conversations with the tools that we created. So next slide, please, Zoe. So this is the timeline that we kind of worked through. So as I say, we employed through the project, through the funding, a PhD student of ours who was already working in this type of area in terms of kind of community engagement. She did some significant analysis on all of the outputs from previous conversations, and also some desktop research around existing toolkits out there to engage with communities. And through that research, we kind of identified some criteria that we wanted our toolkit to kind of adhere to. So keeping it really flexible, making sure that it was really accessible, easy to use, and kind of low barrier to entry and usage in terms of you can just print a couple of sheets of paper and you get cracking. So there was nothing whizzy or fancy or anything like that. It was just kind of let's get going, and with a few kind of pens and pencils and stuff you could get sort of kind of get into the conversations. We then ran toolkit workshops with the community conversation strategy group. So that was kind of experts across the district that were working in community engagement, and we had those workshops to kind of develop the prototypes for the tools. We based it on a couple of conversations. I'll kind of touch on that in just a second. And then we ran our own community conversations, as I said, which I'll go into a bit more detail on. And then we kind of shared the feedback, the insights, and disseminated all of that to policymakers, and then various other groups, which I'll again cover later on. So next slide, please, Zoe. So this was the toolkit workshop that we ran 3 of them with the strategy group, and it was a really energizing set of workshops actually, to take different kind of ideas around who we might want to engage with these conversations and how we might connect with them through some tools. So we looked initially at rural and coastal communities and what might be the ways to unlock and kind of engage with those communities. And we also looked at NEET, so not in education, employment or training, and again, what kind of tools could we use to unlock conversations with those groups. And then next slide, Zoe, we created our kind of draft toolkit. So I'll again include a link to the toolkit. It's now available on our website, but we created 5 different tools, so you can see, imagine if, and picture this here, and as Yola said, the Plymouth were kind enough to use some of those tools and test them out with their conversations that they were having around the hub. And we then tested out our prototypes with the community conversations that we held. As I say, we wanted the tools to feel really easy to use and really easy to understand. We've kind of created a little bit of guidance that we've given and shared on the website as well, in terms of what you might do with them, how they might work. But hopefully the possibilities are not quite endless, but almost, and we really want them to be adaptive and for people to try them in different contexts and situations and to tell us about them. So that's the kind of call to action from my session today. I'll take you through the 2 conversations that we were able to hold in testing a couple of the tools and then iterating them from there. So the first conversation we held was in Rylands estate in Lancaster, which is a priority ward. Many families are on low income, and but actually the community itself is really engaged and has really been empowered by a lot of work with the local CVS organisation to enact really positive change for their own community. And therefore we had a fantastic uptake in the community conversation. It was a group that had been identified in that early research that had been seldom heard in some of those previous community conversations, so it's great to see such a fantastic turnout. And Yola mentioned this, but we also paid our participants to come along, and I think that was something that we did really feed back to policymakers afterwards, because I think that's something that often overlooked and had been overlooked in this scenario. But we tested out the tools, so we used the Imagine If and the comic strip tools in this conversation, and we really did see fantastic results. The people really opened up. They were quite reluctant to start with. It was great to sort of watch the journey unfold, and they did share some really emotional things. We were talking about education and skills, so that was again a theme that had come out of that initial research that had been missed and was a gap that we we wanted to address and work with communities on. And yeah, it was fantastic. It's so inspirational and so interesting to see kind of the experiences that people were able to share using the tools. We also asked them for feedback on the tools as well, so we were able to iterate for our second community conversation. So on the next slide, we held that with young people. So we held that at a local college, so 16 to 25-year-olds. You can see the kinds of comments that came back from the feedback. So more fizz drinks and pizza was good. So that's, for me, that was a winner. But we, again, had a great uptake. The room was really full. And again, I was blown away by how open people were, and willingness to share was just fantastic. Again, brought up some really emotive kind of topics when we talked about education skills. Lots of people in the room were really affected by the pandemic, as you might expect, but so aspirational. And when we talked about the kind of future and the ideas that they had for their own future, we were absolutely blown away. So yeah, fantastic conversations. I'll touch now briefly on the kind of project insights. And I think for me, one of the biggest things was the kind of collaboration and partnership that we were able to kind of galvanized through this project. So we'd worked with these partners before, but never quite unlocked the thing that would bring us all together in such a kind of strong way. And I think since then we've been able to kind of work on potential collaborative ideas and other projects that we can work on together. So that's been really fantastic. I think, as I said, valuing people's time and views was absolutely crucial to this project, and that's something that we really did want to feed back to our partners, to the policymakers, and then beyond. So that we definitely saw the value of doing that. I think the idea of bringing communities together and allowing them to share their views was something that really was very, very powerful that came out of the project. So something that we really wanted to continue to do. And I've spoken to Gemma and Zoe about this. This is a drum I'm banging endlessly, but I think the role of the connector was really crucial to this project. So there were, we were quite limited on our resource, or very limited in terms of time and funds, and we were very grateful for the funding that we got. But obviously, it was a lot. We had great ambitions, and I think without the connector roles, kind of bringing together the academics that we were working with and the civic partners, I think we maybe wouldn't have been able to achieve as much in the time that we had. So I think, yeah, the connect role, as many of you are today, I think is so crucial to projects like this. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I can obviously talk a bit more. I've got just a brief slide on dissemination. So the things that we've kind of shared and the groups that we've shared with so far. So sharing it internally and externally, I think is really crucial, because often in a university, you don't know what everyone else is up to. So that's been really great. And every time I share it, kind of talk about it, someone else says, oh, you need to go and talk to this person. So that's always good. We've been testing out the tools in a variety of settings and contexts. So the academics that worked on the project had taken the tools and used it in their own academic practices, and with great feedback so far, and again more adaptations, which has been fantastic and exactly what we wanted. Some of our partners have shared the tools on their website as well, which is fantastic to kind of just broaden that remit even further. And then we've been sharing the insights with civic partners, policymakers, and kind of making sure that, yeah, some of those kind of lessons learned and the actual content of those conversations has been shared. We've also just developed a showcase video for the project, and it's being edited as we speak. So I'll be able to share that as soon as it's ready. But yeah, I'm looking forward to questions from you all. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Abby. And yeah, again, a huge amount that you've achieved in what was essentially a very short amount of time that we gave you the funding for. So thank you for that. We've got a couple of questions. So brilliant. We've got all of our speakers from the first half up. So we'll see how we go with time. But the first question, Yola, I'd like to pose to you, if that's okay. So Ben has asked, can you tell us more about the research topics and the disciplines that were of interest to the communities that you engaged with during your workshops?
Yeah, I think probably a lot of what we saw from Alice and Camberwell was health, housing, and yeah, that part of Plymouth particularly has a very strong network, and also a lot of excellent projects already happening around those themes. So predominantly they were the two I would say was health and housing, because a lot of those groups are already familiar with them. So they were looking for support with how to get some other projects off the ground, or to further fund some of the projects that were potentially coming to an end as well. So a lot of the findings were that actually there are some similarities between on very different scales, but a lot of researchers are looking for money to support those areas, and those groups need that smaller. So they were the two I would say that came out most strongly.
Thanks, Yola, and really interesting, Alice, Joel, that correlation then with your focus in terms of health and housing and health inequalities as well, and that being a focus for your work. We have a question that's, I guess, posed to all of you, so maybe it's a hands up job for who wants to take it. But this is a question from Nikki asking, how important do you feel it is to have dedicated paid resource long-term in the universities to sustain and build on community engagement? Is it essential, or can it be fitted within other roles, or both? Yola, you've got your hand up first. I'm sure others like to come in. Go, Yola.
I felt quite strongly about this because I'm a public engagement manager, and I didn't really have community engagement experience. And we came across some hurdles, I think, with people who were really passionate about what they were doing in the community, and I felt necessarily best placed to sort of support that. So we had a head of regional and civic engagement, but again, nobody sort of on the ground. And I think it's really important, from the back of the event we did a couple of weeks ago where they were saying we need more of this, and I'm like, gosh, yes, of course, but internally thinking, how am I going to do that? I absolutely think that there needs to be resource, but I think a lot of us in the university sector are probably in a similar situation where there's changes happening, cuts happening. And so, although I did put that in I'd love to have this going forward, notes to the consultant that was coming in, to look at what was happening going forward. It didn't happen. So, yeah.
Thank you, Yola. Not sure whose hand went up first between Abby and Nikki, but Nikki, I know you posed a question along the same lines, I guess, in the chat. So if I come to you next, Nikki.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think you do need to bring in expertise around community engagement, because it's a particular discipline, really, and you need people with skills to do that. It's not to say that they can't be learned by somebody in a university, but that the skills themselves should be recognised. But I think equally important is senior management commitment to doing this and continuing to do it, because otherwise it just becomes a piecemeal thing. I've written in the chat, how far are we from universities resourcing this work, funding this work from their own resources, rather than, small scale, relatively short-term projects like the ones we've been working on. They ought to be integrated across and valued across the whole university. And I think that's where we ought to be aiming to get to. And that would include resourcing of the relevant skills and posts to carry out the work on a consistent and long-term basis.
Abby, I'll come to you next.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think it speaks to your point, Gemma, from the beginning of your presentation, to say that it takes time. This work takes time. And I think it can lead to just that extractive, kind of position if you're picking things up and putting it down, picking communities up and putting them down. And I think without that consistency and long-term approach to funding resources, to funding people, to funding skills, I think that we're in danger of all falling foul of that, whether that's our intention or not, and I think that's where we really need to see a shift in thinking in the sector. I think, as Yola said, we're all facing, or many of us are facing, challenges, and this might not be seen as absolute core, but I think when we're getting that mandate from government, I would argue that it is, and I think that's where we do need to see that long-term commitment to it. And I completely agree with Nikki that it needs to be from that top level, all the way down.
Thanks, Abby. And Alice and Joel, I'll come to you.
Yeah, we'll be quick, and kind of echoing what Nikki and Abby have kind of already been saying. I think, like Nikki said, there is a specific skill set to this, and it's not always that visible. I mean, it's something our team talk about a lot, and we've been doing a lot of delivery as a team in community engagement, but we're moving to more of a support role. And we know there are loads of academics like Joel, like Shibboleth, who've been doing this work for a really long time and been carving it out of their time. But, you know, I think the risk of not properly resourcing it and not giving it the long-term time that it needs is that it just, as Abby says, it becomes extractive, or we start parachuting in, which is really not the way we should be practicing, you know, as institutions. I don't know if you want to add on, Joel.
Yeah, no, I would just add that in the broader context where people who are performing community engagement or civic engagement work are, I think, undervalued, and in a lot of cases doing that on a voluntary basis and doing engagement work, which is essentially a statutory service in a lot of cases, then universities need to be pioneers for valuing community engagement work.
Absolutely. Thanks everyone for that. And it really, I know we're sort of cutting into the break a little bit, but we have given 15 minutes for that. And I think this follow-up question is really key for what you've all said, where someone has asked to describe a bit further that role of the connector that I think, you know, I mentioned and Abby mentioned, and really leans into what we're talking about here, you know, the short-termism of projects and how we can quite quickly become extractive with communities when the funding's there and then suddenly it's not. How we at the NCCPE were starting to explore the role of the connector is that individual within the university that works with internal structures in the university, but then external partners to make those connections, break down those barriers, create effective partnership working, and really is that person that holds all of those relationships. And if that role goes, the institutional memory of those partnerships tends to go. And that's something that we started to explore within the action learning process. And it's why we're starting to look at this civic capabilities framework to try and, I guess, further professionalize the skills and the experience that those roles hold. So I guess that's my sort of response to that question about the connector. We've got probably 2 minutes till we need to go to a break. I don't know if anyone on the panel wants to kind of come in with what their experience is of being a connector role, or the impact that you have with that. Abby.
Yeah, just briefly, I know I touched on it in my presentation, but I think it was really interesting. So when Yolo and I were working together, we sort of uncovered that we were coming at this connector role from quite different backgrounds. And I thought that was really interesting in terms of the experience that we were bringing to this role, to this kind of imagined role as a connector, because my background and my sort of day job is stakeholder engagement. So it's not about specific community engagement work. And I think for me, that experience has been really useful in connecting with those civic partners that then leads us on to that community engagement through their networks, and kind of that sort of organic map of everything that kind of feeds into our district. But Yola's background was kind of WP, and again a different take on that. So I think the fact that we're bringing this patchwork of skills together is really interesting to me, and kind of what does it take to kind of be that kind of ultimate connector? You know, do you need to have those skills of working directly with communities? Do you have to understand what the university can do and what capabilities we have to offer? And then those kind of relationship building skills with the partners as well, that we're, you know, civic partners that we're working with. So it just, for me, it's a really interesting kind of I guess bringing together of lots of different skills, and I think that's something to be celebrated, but also to be better understood, maybe.
Yeah, thanks, Abby. Thanks, everyone, from our first half of this event. We are going to have to move to a break.
Morning, Hannah and Rob. We're going to hand over to you now, hear about the Right to Food University, building a blueprint for change.
Morning. Hopefully you can hear me. Fantastic. Brilliant. Morning, everyone, or afternoon. It's now just afternoon. I've already haven't had enough coffee yet this morning, apparently, or afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you about and give an oversight of what the work that we've been doing on the Right to Food University and how we're building a blueprint for change. This is quite a long-standing collaboration we'll talk about between the University of Kent and the Food Foundation. If Hannah is on the call, I don't know if Hannah wants to introduce the Food Foundation briefly.
Yeah, I can do. Hi, everyone. So I'm Hannah Brinston. I'm Head of Policy and Advocacy at the Food Foundation. The Food Foundation is a charity that works to try and get sort of healthy and sustainable diets for everyone. I primarily work on sort of national policy and things like that, but a big part of what we do is also on local policy and place-based initiatives. And in this case, working at how we can kind of use the university as a place to sort of boost and explore opportunities for improving health, reducing food insecurity and things like that. So we've been working really closely with Kent University for, I want to say 3 years, but I might be maybe 2.
Yeah, if we go to the next slide, I'll talk exactly about the heritages.
Yes.
So yeah. Thank you, Hannah. So where did this come about? I mean, this came about in 2022 when we were when we had a visit by Michael Thackeray, who's the UN Special Rapporteur for the Right to Food, to talk to us about what Right to Food was. And there's a quote that stuck with us, which is, food is not just a commodity, it's a result of a set of practices. It's part of the rhythm of everyday life. We give meaning to life through how and what we eat, who we eat with, establishes bonds that create kin and community. And for us, that was a really nice and powerful statement that resonated with us, and we started to start thinking about, what does it mean to be a Right to Food university? How can we strive to become one? How can that cut across our civic networks? And also, how can we support others to aspire to do the same? And so we started working with the Food Foundation to try and see and establish what that could do. Next slide, please, Zoe. We covered a whole reflection as part of this process and working through with the Food Foundation to reflect on what this meant and how it could do. I don't want to spend too much on all of these, but the key thing is trying to move away from food being a commodity, but then it being part of this kind of broader civic practice and using it as a lens for which we see all of our civic work from all our different partnerships internally and externally to work together. The key point I want to highlight here is at the bottom, which is we started seeing and realizing that universities are more than educational institutions. It's familiar for us in the civic world, but we see them as their communities where students and staff work and live, but they also eat together and often with the local community. And we really felt that if we reflected on how that worked together, we would be able to really reflect on what our values were as a university. And through this process, we established 4 pillars of what this looked like. Next slide, please. And kind of developed our mission throughout this process of what this should look like. And our 4 missions that we put on were putting the right to food on the world stage, transforming our food systems through teaching and research, tackling food insecurity while promoting healthy and sustainable communities within the university, and also addressing food inequalities within our region. Now, I could spend a lot of time talking about lots of different things that I've been working on with civic work on this across all of these, but I particularly want to highlight some beautiful work that went on in Mission 4, where we worked on working with our students to go out and glean food that was rotting on plants in the local community, bringing that onto our campus and actually setting up a food bank on campus to support bringing that food that otherwise to reach the people that needed it. But what I really want to speak about in particular is Mission 1 and putting the right to food on the world stage. And this is where our work that we were developing with the NCIA project has really stepped in. And we had 3 core kind of goals we want to look at that. We wanted to host an annual food summit and develop a platform for collaboration for people to talk about it. We wanted to host learning visits, and we wanted to develop a blueprint that enables other universities to nationally and internationally to move this on. Next slide, please. What have we done on this so far along our goals that we wanted to do through this NCIA work? Well, we chaired a session, in fact, multiple sessions at the UK Future Food Symposium a few months ago. We've been invited to events speaking at Google. We've presented to international partners all around talking about the right to food and starting to put it on the world stage. We're engaged in large national projects and international projects related at the interface with food and food security. For example, the recently established Bezos Centers for Sustainable Proteins, we're at the core of that, as well as projects that work at the interface with civic partners, communities, research, and innovation in order to enable these changes. Next slide, please. And one of the big things I want to spend a little bit longer talking about, though, is our development of our blueprint. So this idea is to develop a toolkit for other universities to be able to follow what we're doing and take it a bit further. To develop that blueprint, we built on 2 resources that were nicely available. So that's the NCCPE's EDGE tool to assess how well established things are, and the Civic Impact Framework using that toolkit of mapping, partnering, agreeing, resourcing, evaluating, and learning as a process in order to underpin how universities can reflect on their civic work on right to food. Next slide, please. And through that, we took these progress levels from this mapping, partnering, agreeing, resourcing, evaluated, and developed 6 domains that we thought were key for a right to food for a university. So that's taking from leadership and strategy, learning and teaching, research and innovation, looking at the university's civic mission, looking at the university's food community, and also establishing estates and commercial services. And we developed a blueprint which allows people to address or think about where they are at the moment, but then developed a set of case studies and resources to help people through these processes to address and move on, and understanding what this can look like to be a right to food university at each of these stages going on. Next slide, please. So in the process of rolling that out, once we developed it, we then wanted to engage in dialogue with a number of different universities in order to see what we can do next in order to build this blueprint into something that's practical and usable by universities across the UK. And we wanted to secure this insight from other universities in order to help shape the future of right to food beyond this blueprint and into the future. We wanted to develop this set of blueprints and case studies in order to enhance resources to enable people to do it through feedback. And we also wanted to develop a tool for light touch internal audits to help universities that were struggling from their first stages establish where they were and what they could do in the process in order to take that on. And this is the process of work that we've been taking on, certainly most recently. Next slide, please, throughout this process. How have we done? So we've so far directly engaged with 6 universities who we've taken through this process. We've supported them all through a first stage audit. We've hosted roundtables. We've had direct one-to-one conversations with these 6 universities, and helping some to then start progressing to the next steps of what that can look like for a right to food university and establish that. Beyond that, through all the other work we've been looking at, we've worked with approximately 15 other universities and other businesses, both nationally and internationally, who are keen to be involved in the future and are following the process as we go through that. We've had direct engagement with university food suppliers, higher education partners, local government, community partners, and national press in order to build the picture of this. And through all of these conversations that we had, particularly with the local community, we've built some communities of practice. We've established some communities of practice and online resource packs. Next slide, please. We've received some national recognition. I wanted to pick up on this, the Green Ground Awards, and actually just submitted to the International Green Ground Awards. And next slide, please. And our next steps are really to build this much further. We're launching our blueprint model, online resources imminently. The website for that is on the next slide, and we'll be able to share it. We are increasing our progress. We're building towards more funding in order to support a larger community to develop this in the future. And if we go to the next slide, we're really keen to actually build on this network and for you to join us and anyone else to join us in the future. A key thing of this was these communities of practice. We want to establish this. This is starting with our cohort, but we want it a UK-wide community of practice. And the 3 core lenses we're looking at are cost of living and food insecurity, curriculum and teaching, procurement and catering. So please reach out to us if you'd like to engage with any of these communities of practice. We're keen to involve you into losing the right to food as a lens for civic work. If you want to find out more, the website address is there, and we'll share it in the chat as well. And please get in contact through either of those email addresses below. We're keen to really use the right to food and establish this right to food brand across the UK and ultimately across the world, as that's what we're looking at. And if you go to the final slide, we have an image that we put together of what we imagine a future right to food university would look like, of everyone civically input. And I wanted to just finalize with that last point. In the UK, there's 2.1 million students. There's 230 odd thousand staff employed in UK universities alone, let alone our wider civic work that we can do with it. So really integrating food systems within the wider civic partnership that we can look at as a university. We visioned all of these working together as right to food universities in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Hannah. We'll have time for questions after the next couple of presentations, so please do pop any questions you've got in the chat, and we'll share all the slides and email addresses and things like that afterwards as well. So now we're going to invite Neil and Jen from Anglia Ruskin University up to speak.
Thank you. And big thanks to Gemma and Zoe for making all this happen. So I'm Neil Daniel, and I'm joined by Jennifer Aswidi from ARU, and we're part of the Students Knowledge Exchange team. And we're basically strongly engaging students in civic activities. And Jennifer is our community listening officer. So we really tied into listening to our communities. And we're presenting today our Partners in Practice. It's a way to work with your communities. And next slide, please. And we've got two projects that basically both share a similar approach. And this is reverse volunteering is our methodology. We've been supporting long-term unemployed who've got locked out of work. And also we've been supporting refugee medics who've been unable to get into work themselves in the UK, even though they're qualified medics. So similar scenario, really. Next slide, please. So the strategy is what we call reverse volunteering. We have volunteering happening on both sides. So we're engaging our staff as volunteers, where they bring the time and expertise, and also draw on the wider university resources to support participants from outside who are volunteering their time to engage with the programme, and very importantly, bringing their lived experiences and insights into the university. Next slide, please. So I'll first of all just talk about long-term unemployed project. And as mentioned earlier at Plymouth, which has this big discrepancy in terms of economic wealth across the city. It's the same at Cambridge. And there's an area called the Abbey Ward, which is suffering greatly in terms of poor economic, sort of achievement. And within this area, almost 20% of individuals are trapped into long-term unemployment. It's a staggering problem. And these are individuals who are wanting to get into work. And there's a lot of barriers that they face because they've suffered from long-term illness or care responsibilities. These gaps in employment have meant that they've lost confidence, become demotivated, and they're actually undervaluing their own skill sets. Next slide, please. So we've taken this approach where basically we've, as I mentioned earlier, we've got staff volunteers. In this project, we'd also tap into our HR team within the university, and building on this long-term community partnership that we developed. And I forgot to mention earlier that it all began with community listening exercise at the beginning, where really we're listening to our local community to find out what the problems were. And then we're responding with this reverse volunteering approach to try and satisfy that. Next slide, please. So we kicked off with the project. This was a pilot project. We're just testing out the idea. We basically invited people to come in who were long-term unemployed. We ran a one-to-one CV clinic and then gave the participants an experience of work in areas that they were interested in. This took quite a lot of organising to try and fit the participants' interest with the availability of staff. It was quite dynamic and challenging. And we also gave them quite a lot of employability support. Next slide, please. One of the key things that came out of it, which we wanted to achieve, was to boost their confidence. And I guess one of the key learnings around this was around awareness of the transferability of their older skills. Many of them thought their skills were redundant now. And many felt that they're actually going to be discriminated against in the job market because of their, let's say, well-being issues and challenges, and having been a carer as well. But it's completely the opposite to what they expected. So they were the key things there. And what came out is that they were wanting to do more volunteering type work. And we basically running that program now. Next slide, please. So one of the surprises that came out of this was intense local media interest in the long-term unemployed. It was just unbelievable. Next slide, please. So over to you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Neil. So I'm going to be talking about the Refugee Medics pilot. So ARU has an already established relationship with these organizations, Breaking Barriers, Refu Aid, Chelmsford City Council, and ELGA. And through talks with these organizations who support refugees in this area, which is the east of England, we uncovered this need. And the need was there exists a good number of highly skilled and highly experienced refugee medics who are currently unable to practice medicine in the UK due to certain systemic barriers. We organized an early listening activity in collaboration with partners to sort of uncover what these barriers were. And some of the things we uncovered were the language proficiency challenge, the fact that there was no community of practice for this group of medics, access to resources, and there was no clear guide for them on what requalification entailed to practice in the UK. Next slide, please. So having uncovered, the skills and potential that this group of people have, and the barriers that exist for them practicing medicine in the UK, also identifying the resources that the university has, which can be aligned towards addressing these challenges. Medical colleagues from across the university, in collaboration with colleagues from partner organizations, came together to design this pilot. And one of the main aspects of this pilot was a medical staff-led guidance, which is one of the things that our refugee medics really stated that they needed: guidance on requalification. Next slide, please. So we had a one-day pilot event where we invited refugee medics to share their experiences and to listen to them again. And this was really helpful because the way the project was designed was it was designed to be adaptable. So we weren't relying on what we had heard from them in the past only, but also what we would hear from them on the day, because we knew that needs change, and as time goes by, things change. So we did hear a couple of new things from them, and thankfully, because of the way the program was designed, our medical colleagues were able to respond to those needs as they came. We also had talks on pathways to practice, guidance to requalification, like they had requested. Next slide, please. So from our pre and post evaluation, we found that the clarity that was absent previously was now present, at least to a large extent. Our participants understood what it would take to requalify, and understood that they didn't only have to seek requalification to be specialists, because these were people who had 20, 15 years of experience in the medical field. We had cardiothoracic surgeon who had 15 years experience. We had an orthopedic surgeon who had over 20 years experience, and who were, still thinking of going in that direction. But from everything that happened that day, they could see that there were other options open to them. They had opportunities to network with one another, to listen to, their experiences, where each of them were on their journey, and also to network with the medical team at ARU, which proved to be very helpful from their feedback. Next slide, please. So one of our key learnings from two projects that we've spoken about now is the importance of community listening with regards to designing a project for the community. And it's one thing we hammer on all the time, because we believe that if you want to create social change, it has to be done with the people and not just for them. Yeah, I'm going to hand over to Neil now. No time to.
Yeah, just very quickly. So we basically developed an action learning pack around this that we can share with everybody to do to use this mechanism of reverse volunteering to solve all sorts of community problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Jen. It's great to hear that, and I'm sure we'll be able to see the Civic Impact Toolkit series as well. Okay, we're going to hear from Katrina now, from Bath University. If you've got any questions for Neil and for Jen, please do put them in the chat.
Hello, yeah, Katrina Kelly from the University of Bath. I hope you can hear me okay. There's some slightly loud background here, so do shout if it's causing a problem.
It's all good.
Good. Okay, so if we skip on a slide. At the University of Bath, 4 years ago now, we started developing a civic agreement that was launched a year ago. And initially it focused on 5 thematic areas, which we worked on with various different civic partners. So there were initially 4 signatories to the civic agreement. It was the 2 universities, so University of Bath, which is where I'm from, Bath Spa University, which is co-located in the centre of the city with the University of Bath, Bath and North East Somerset Council, which covers the city and slightly wider region, and the Royal United Hospitals, which covers the Bath and region area, plus a bit wider again, so none of our geography is quite aligned. So we sort of started with these first 5 thematic areas, and they were a good starting point, but progress was slow because everyone was coming at it from different angles and with different objectives, and it just was quite a slow start. And then about a month after we signed our civic agreement, we had concurrently, through the civic agreement partners, been working on a shared economic strategy for the region, and that was launched, and that had 6 key deliverables within it. So the 5 thematic areas merged into becoming these 6 new working groups, and they were a lot more focused on specific targets and objectives. Each of the civic partners signing the agreement were given responsibility for a working group, and in some cases 2. So both universities were given responsibility for co-leading one of the working groups, which was focused on creativity and innovation. And what we found was, through being part of the NCIA process, not just this latest piece of funding, but the earlier action learning work as well, it really helped to sort of get some of those conversations going and focus them and bring collaboration together. Can we skip To the next slide. Thank you. So the objective of the working group that we were put in charge with Bath Spa University was essentially to establish Bath and North East Somerset as a centre for scientific and health academic excellence, inclusive innovation and creativity, which is quite a large demand. And as I'm sure you can imagine, we had lots and lots of workshops where we brought the leaders from both institutions together along with other industry leaders and health leaders and those supporting innovation across the region, and everyone would sit in a room and have fabulous conversations and get to know each other and come up with all these wonderful ideas and air all the challenges, of which there are so many, but it never really felt like it was moving anywhere particularly quickly because we just didn't really have a sort of focus or a starting point or a way of focusing it. And again, everyone had their own objectives. We were trying to expand the university, which is very hard when you're in a UNESCO World Heritage City. Bath Spa were trying to create space for a fashion museum. Everyone had their own objectives, and we were all trying to mesh these together, and it wasn't really working. And then this piece of land sort of came up through the city centre, running along the river, which offered an opportunity for a new innovation quarter as part of its redevelopment. And yet the focus still sort of struggled to happen. And then on the next slide, I think what we became aware of was that we were trying to find a solution without really knowing what the problem was. We had, between the two universities, two different sets of support structures for innovation in the region, offering quite different things. So we were offering support for innovation in science, technology, data-driven businesses, and Bath Spa were offering support for innovation in creative, the arts, music businesses. There were also 5 or 6 other providers in the region that we were aware of. Nobody was having a conversation about what was missing or where there was duplication or where we could be working more collaboratively. So we wanted to drive more innovation, but we didn't know what was already driving innovation and whether it was working. So went for the NCIA funding to try and essentially create that focus that we needed to get us started. We go to the next slide. Oh, if we just go back a slide a minute. That picture there is from Keynsham. So Keynsham is part of Bath and North East Somerset. It's one of the sort of outlying towns on the edge of the authority. And that was it's the redevelopment of the Cadbury's chocolate site. So it's quite, when we're talking about innovation, that's been, I guess, one of the that some of those industries have had to completely be really lost and redeveloped over the years. Going on. So yeah, the NCIA funding came just in time, and essentially what it did for us was allow us to sort of really narrow down the conversation, focus the conversation, bring partners together. The objective that we set out was to map the existing state of play for innovation support across Bath and North East Somerset, understand where all of the support was coming from, and then look at how inclusive it was, to look at whether it was truly available to all parts of our community or whether there were gaps, whether there were parts of the community that weren't being reached or it wasn't suitable for, and whether then we could work collaboratively to fill some of those gaps, apply for funding together to put skills and entrepreneurship training in place in the city in areas where it would help drive greater innovation without duplicating what we already had or recreating challenges that potentially already existed. So we worked with a company called Diversely, and one of the most important things that we had to do right at the beginning was define what we meant by inclusive innovation. And what became really clear to us is that even though we'd sat in a room with all these partners quite a few times, had lots of conversations about inclusive innovation, everyone had quite different definitions of it and different understandings. So even just sitting down at the beginning and thinking about some definitions and agreeing on them was a really valuable process to go through. And so defining inclusive innovation, innovation support, inclusive innovation support, what underserved communities meant to each of us as a cohort, and what our understanding was of those communities within our area. Then we carried out, well, the company that worked with us carried out interviews, so worked with the Studio and Set Squared, which are the two organisations run by the two universities to support innovation, but also Cool Ventures, which is an organisation appointed by our local council to support innovation, and with our local council and with the West of England Combined Authority, which is the large combined authority that sits over our region, to really understand exactly what support was in place, what the challenges were with people accessing that support. And then I also did desk work and spoke to some of the stakeholders who were accessing or would want to access that sort of support. What it found was that essentially there was quite, because the shape of our region, oh sorry, my phone going off, because of the shape of our region, we have the city, and then we have sort of quite, the city is quite wealthy, and then the rural areas around it tend to be slightly cut off, and there's quite high levels of deprivation. And what was very clear was that there's high levels of digital exclusion for those rural areas, and that limited what support people could get for innovation if they were not in the immediate centre of the city. There were also a lot of financial barriers for the organisations offering support. They were quite often working on unsustainable funding models, short-term funding, short-term staff contracts, and were struggling to keep the doors open from time to time, so weren't particularly in a stable position themselves. There were significant gaps for some of the marginalised communities that we have in our region. So we're on the Kennet and Avon Canal and have a large travelling community, and that community is just not being reached at all with the support that's available. Likewise, we are on the edge of Wiltshire. We've got a very large military community, and again, that's a community that has been completely missed. And also within the organisations that are offering support, there's a lack of adoption of inclusive practices. So for where there is support, it's not necessarily working for all people across our community. I think one of the most useful things that we found was that there's quite a big confidence gap. So a lot of potential entrepreneurs from our region don't see themselves as worthy of support. So they wouldn't come forward to get support, even though they absolutely are who it is designed for. So work needs to be done, not just in providing support for entrepreneurs, but making sure that people feel that they are worthy of taking on that support, and that they access it. So yeah, and then in terms of from a civic partnership perspective, outcomes, can we just go back a slide? Outcomes are very much around essentially creating that focus, that shared understanding, and really actually what we hadn't anticipated was that by really focusing in on the inclusivity aspect, even though that had been articulated from the beginning, we maybe hadn't focused on it quite so much, whereas because this project made us focus on that, it's now absolutely core when we're taking those conversations forward, because what we've done is identified the gaps. So it's now embedded from the outset. We can move on. And our learning, yeah, so it was not a big piece of funding given the organisations, the number of organisations involved, but it made a huge difference in focusing everyone and to really sort of get the ball rolling. And now we're in a position that essentially we've got 3 or 4 key partners across the region who are already supporting innovation, who are working together to put in a joint bid around funding innovation support to the West of England Combined Authority, rather than all trying to do bits separately for short-term amounts that would leave them in the same struggling position they've been in for the last however many years. So that collaboration that's come about, and that focus, and the fact that inclusivity is quite a key part of that now, has been a really big win. And also at the bottom there, I said things will always take longer than you think they will. And yes, they do. And yes, things go wrong and people fall out with each other, and people have fallen out with each other. But bringing everyone back around to what the objective is each time, and having a clear objective really helps to move things forward. So yeah.
Thank you, Katrina. Really interesting to hear about that. So I'm just going to bring up our speakers from the second half of the session today. And we do have one question that we'll go to first. So our question is, how do speakers feel they could use their experiences to encourage universities with a less civic focus that resourcing this is valuable and impactful? Give it a second to have a think, and I know that Neil's already responded.
Shall I just re-emphasize the point? I think one of the problems many of our universities face is that large parts of our local communities feel we're completely irrelevant. We're not inclusive, and Cambridge is extreme in terms of wealth and deprivation. And certainly those parts of our community feel as though we're completely irrelevant. In fact, not beneficial to the wider community. And I think by engaging through civic activities like we've been doing, we've created a lot of media interest, local media interest around what we're doing. And I think our communities are seeing that we're putting something back, which is really valuable. Thank you.
Thanks, Neil. Katrina?
Yeah, I think Jennifer's just answered as well, and I completely agree that evidence is really useful. And we've just updated our economic impact report at the University of Bath, and took Johanna's at City Ready's, he's on the call, isn't he? Advice around including civic and environmental impact in that, and it's given me so much data that I kind of knew, but it's now written down so everyone else can see it, which really helps with leadership, because I can tell them, but that's just me telling them. When it's a an analysis organization they've paid telling them, it carries more weight. And I think Johan's report on how to do that was really valuable to us.
Thanks, Katrina. And Hannes, feel free to pop a link in the chat to that report around the economic impacts of civic universities. Rob? There's always some technical difficulties, isn't there? Any other comments about that question from the panel? Is it me that's frozen?
I think you froze for a second.
No, it's definitely Rob.
And now you're both back.
I froze for a second. We're both back. Rob, do you want to come in? No, Rob's definitely frozen.
Sorry.
I think I've got a question.
No.
Oh. Yeah, we can hear you, Rob. Go.
Oh, crikey, my delay's horrendous. I'm really sorry. Yes, I think, for us, the key thing was there are those stories that you can build with this. We find with anything we talk about at open days, there's huge interest from both parents and students. So it helps with recruitment. On top of which, some of the anecdotes we've had from students through the work we've been doing from Right to Food, as students saying that we've enabled them to stay longer on campus through some of the work we've been doing around sustainable food. That has helped meant they haven't had to go home to cook their food and then come back again, so they can concentrate on their studies again. So really selling how the civic work can cut across the other core parts of a university, particularly teaching, is, I think, a really nice story to tell, and persuades leaders that has that value through teaching and recruitment.
Thank you, Rob. I'm going to put Hannah on the spot a little bit now. As someone who doesn't work in a university, how do you find having that sort of strategic agreement with University of Kent around this kind of mission work? How do you find working on that with the university?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. As I said, most of my day job is on like national policy, which is quite well, aside from frustration, quite theoretical a lot of the time, and it's about kind of getting infrastructure into place and policies into place that can then support others. So I think what's been really interesting is looking at how we can make those connections between what's kind of been done at that national level and seeing how it can actually be changed or implemented on the ground through the lens of universities. So I think a really good example of that is we do a lot of work on food insecurity, looking at food insecurity amongst students at Kent, and then finding ways in which we can actually make a tangible difference to that and try and address it. I think it is really important to look at what those practical actions that can be done, but also looking at the way in which, I mean, one of the great things about what we've been doing with Kent is the number of different kind of food systems touch points that we have. So there's the food insecurity elements, there's the kind of catering, which is a little bit about food insecurity, but it's also about health and sustainability, how you can change those menus to kind of be more accessible and healthier for everyone. But then also the teaching, the links to the kind of the farming and things like that. So I think it's really interesting how you can kind of almost use the university as a mini food system sort of space, and then like look at what those levers are at that local level. And I think certainly the conversations we've had with other universities are, you know, every university is in a different place, but there are, you know, every university is, you know, providing some form of catering. It's done in different ways, different extents, but they all do catering. So that's an area of overlap. Food insecurity is another area where we know there's a huge amount of interest across all universities. So kind of then using those kind of, I guess, a bit of a pick and mix approach to say, okay, well, this has worked in Kent. Where are they kind of the touch points with other universities? And I think that's really interesting kind of to see that, I guess, building momentum and looking at those opportunities.
That's lovely. Thanks, Hannah. Great to hear that. We're going to now just have a couple of minutes just to hear what's next for the NCIA. I'd like to say thank you to all of our speakers today. It's been great to hear a short snapshot of what you've been up to. We will be pulling together all of this into a report that we're going to share, and that will be coming out in the autumn as well. And we'll feature some of our smaller pots of innovation funding that we talked about at various points as well. So I'm just going to share the slides again. So we've heard from some of the Action Learning partnerships today. There's lots of other things that have already been released through the NCIA programme. There's a theory of civic change, an equitable partnership working toolkit, and then we're also trying to capture lots of evidence of what works. And some of those will be coming out on the website very soon. There's the Civicast podcast, a debate stage blog series, and then we've also got a big conference in October, Civicon. The sorts of things that we're working on for the next few months is a Civic Impact Dashboard, which there is a trial version on the website, the Civic University Network website to have a look at now. Launching next week is something that has come directly from the Action Learning process, a digital place navigator tool. And that's supporting people to work in place to understand the different infrastructures and organisations that exist in a place and how a university can work with them. Got some what works guides. And then again, Civicon in October, a chance to come along, hear more about projects like this, and get a real handle on what it's like to undertake civic work in the UK today. And there's going to be various bits and bobs of events planned over the autumn period as well. But we'd like to say thank you for coming today, and we'll leave it there, finish a couple of minutes early, and thank you to all of our panellists, and thank you to Gemma for chairing the event alongside me as well.